أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن خلق السماوات والأرض وأنزل لكم من السماء ماء فأنبتنا به حدائق ذات بهجة ما كان لكم أن تنبتوا شجرها أإله مع الله بل هم قوم يعدلون أمن جعل الأرض قرارا وجعل خلالها أنهارا وجعل لها رواسي وجعل بين البحرين حاجزا أإله مع الله بل أكثرهم لا يعلمون أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض أإله مع الله قليلا ما تذكرون أمن يهديكم في ظلمات البر والبحر ومن يرسل الرياح بشرا بين يدي رحمته أإله مع الله تعالى الله عما يشركون أمن يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده ومن يرزقكم من السماء والأرض أإله مع الله قل هاتوا برهانكم إن كنتم صادقين صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah. I welcome you again and thank you for being with us. Muslim youth today and the question of identity. This is a debate that has to be undertaken by Muslim scholars and intellectuals because particularly the youth and Muslims generally are standing at a civilizational crossroads today. Where they are confronted by secular thought in all its forms, in every medium, be it scholarship, be it media or education or science and technology. And they are trying to rediscover their identity between being an ummah and a nation, and how their relationship with religion can be defined. These questions are not only related to the principles and philosophy of life, but also with their application and implementation. I'm glad that we have a scholar today with us who is, I think, international in his personality and character, and with an inspiring journey in the academic life and his scholarly work, particularly in the SIGA that he directs. The International Conference on Islamophobia has become an event that brings together all the Muslim scholarship from all parts of the world. So he is the right person to tell us on how the Muslims across the world, and particularly the Muslim youth, they are grappling with the issue of identity today, and particularly how do they define their relationship with religion, and tempted by all the distractions and inherited with the blessing of Islam. Dr. Sami, in my opinion, and as far as I know, does not need a proper introduction. But if I'll go into that, it will take me several minutes. But I would say that he's a person who inspires so many of us, and not only through his scholarship, but also his activism and his networking skills. So we hope to be enlightened from his talk today. And after his talk, we'll have a comment by Dr. Junaid Ahmed, who is online again from USA, where he teaches. And after his comment, we'll have a comment from Dr. Fakhrul Islam, who is Director of Research and Academic Outreach at the Institute of Policy Studies. We are also joined by Khalid Rahman Sahab. He is Chairman of the Institute. May I request Dr. Sami to please present his speech.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. First, I thank you for your generous introduction, and also want to thank the Institute of Policy Studies in Islamabad for this invitation.
Dr. Yeah,
We still have an echo.
I think you will have to check your audio, please. Your mic is muted now. Dr. Sami, your mic is muted now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, because we had an echo, so we had to deal with this problem. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Please go ahead.
All right. So I'm trying, of course, to remember, when I was in Pakistan a few years ago, and how pleasant it was for me to present. I think it was a keynote speech in memoriam of Dr. Ahmed, Junaid's father. So thank you again for the invitation. Today, I would like to address this issue that was assigned to me concerning the question of identity. And it would be probably a not traditional address in terms of how I'm going to present it. 1 second here, I'm trying to see. It's not doing it. 1 second. Oh, there we go. So the outline, I will go through some introduction and background, and then talk about what's an identity. And then I will give some definitions and assumptions by which I will try to present a model. I will discuss several kinds or multi-level identities, and then I will focus on what I call the primary identity model and the principles it stands for, and then make some conclusions. So in terms of introduction, when we talk about the question of identity, perhaps has been one of the most inquired about questions of mankind. Throughout history, philosophers, theologians, scholars, scientists, artists, psychologists, even politicians have pondered the question and contributed to what it actually means. At its core, identity is a person's sense of self. Identity is the answer to the question, who am I? Since birth, people go through different phases. We learn from our faith that everyone is born with what we call a fitra state, a primordial state. We're all born in that state of fitra, as the Prophet said. Of course, this fitra is subject to many influences throughout our childhood and adolescence. But during these periods, small changes take place gradually and accumulate at a relatively slow pace. Every person could define his or her identity based on their personal characteristics, family or tribal formations, social affiliations, cultural influences, life experiences, etc., etc. Social scientists have pondered whether a person's core identity by adolescence is constant or slowly evolves over time. They call it the question of persistence. Are we the same over time, or do we continually evolve? Of course, there are traits in every human being that are for the most part constant or near constant, such as our personal appearance, fingerprints, DNA composition, or our native language or accent that make most people unique or distinctive. But there are other parts of identity that is formed through cultural influences and social formations, as well as through conscious decision-making, through study, investigation, or exercising our intellect in an attempt to redefine who we are. In short, every person is made of a biological entity, which is organic, material, physical body. As human beings, we also have a mind. That mind gives us the ability to think, to express ourselves, to express our emotions, to make decisions, or generally speaking, exercise our free will. But there is also an immaterial part to us, which some may call a soul, and others refer to as our spiritual side. While changes in the material or physical side are relatively very small, the intellectual and spiritual sides are subject to social customs, cultural influences, societal and institutional conditioning, as well as to consciously evolve through one's exercise of their intellect and free will. Now we come to the question, what's an identity? A person's identity can gradually shift and change due to changes or disruptions in their circumstances and environment. There are times that an individual may feel lost or confused, as if everything they believed about themselves or their beliefs is suddenly gone. Such a state of affairs tends to lead to an identity crisis. Searching for identity is natural during youth and even later in time. Most of these searches of self and purpose build upon and confirming or reviewing one's existing identity. But an identity crisis occurs when an individual experiences situations that completely destabilize or question their beliefs or understanding of self. Some of these experiences may be traumatic events, such as experiencing wars, dislocations, death of a loved one, diagnosis of a disease, or even traumatic experiences. They may also be other events that change us in other ways, such as aging, bankruptcy, or moving to an unfamiliar area or losing a job. An identity crisis is an effort to redefine the sense of self. Although some people can readjust with relative ease, others may struggle for a long time. An identity crisis may become a problem if the person feels empty, worthless, depressed, or starts harboring feelings of despair. Now, let me talk about some definitions and assumptions on that question of identity. The first definition or assumption I would like to talk about is that there are differences between what an identity is and a personality and character. These three terms are not the same. When we talk about a personality, second here, just do it in order so we don't lose sight. So when we talk about identity, what we're talking about here is who we are. What do you stand for? What belief system you believe in? The ethics you uphold, the morals you practice, the values you live by. That's what a personality, that's what an identity is. Personality, on the other hand, is your dispositional qualities, such as whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. Which means whether you live alone or in social group or within a social group. Another example of your personality is your temperament, or whether you are more being an optimist or a pessimist. Generally speaking, your personality guides your behavior. The character, on the other hand, okay, having difficulty. Okay, there we go. All right, when we discuss character, though, excuse me, it's very similar to personality. That means it guides also your behavior, but it refers to your hidden side, how you would behave under difficult circumstances when the stakes are high and decision-making is fateful or momentous. It shows whether or not you would display, for example, these deep core values that only come when people are under pressure: truthfulness, honesty, bravery, generosity, humility, etc., etc. In this talk, I will address only identity, meaning that my argument, my model, will only address the question of who we are and what your or our core beliefs and values should be. My second assumption is that people may have solid or soft identity. A solid identity is someone who is sure of themselves and who they are, while a soft identity is someone who's confused or unsure about themselves or in a constant search of who they are. My third assumption is that we have multiple levels of identities. And with the existence of many levels of identities, they could be classified into primary, secondary, or even tertiary identities. My discussion today will only focus on the primary type of identities. People choose what defines them, as well as the level to which they would like to identify themselves with. For example, some of identity types could be racial identity: Black, white, Latino, Chinese, Arab, Punjab, South Asian, meaning in racial formations, Turk, Kurd. Ethnic, religious, cultural, sectarian, geographical, national, gender, family, tribal, political, economic and social class, physical attributes, education level, career, physical or mental ability, generational, etc., etc., etc. All these are different levels of identities. Each person would choose their primary identity and base their behavior on that choice. Most people today, in the age of the nation state, in the age when the Islamic, the first, what I call the first Islamic universality, when we had an Islamic presence or existence or life or caliphate, you call it what you wish, they had a different kind of identity than within the nation state. And even within the nation state, people have multiples of identities. So now I come to my fourth assumption, is that I'm not going to really focus on these kind of identities. I did say that each person will pick what their primary identity is. When we talk about feminists, for example, their primary identity is feminism. When we talk about blackness for some people, that could be their main or major identity. For others, could be nationalism. For others, could be all sorts of other identities. People could have these multiple identities, but once they pick their primary source of identity, all other identities would come underneath. So my fourth assumption here is that I would discuss only the primary source of identity of an individual, but for an individual to be genuine, that identity should be chosen by one's free will, not something that is coerced or forced or imposed, nor should it be obscured, distorted, or disparaged. It certainly needs to be embraced and practiced through acceptance and consent. My fifth and final assumption is this point deals with the hierarchy that identifies and leads to the primary source of identity. And this is something that I am proposing. It's not something that is necessarily agreed upon by scholars. But I will show that one's primary identity would ultimately be governed by either a model that is based on a Tawhidi paradigm or other models, and here I say it in plural, because these are multiple secular paradigms. They could be in different forms. It could be in strict form or in partial form. So before I go into my presentation, I will go over this hierarchy so that it would lead to these type of primary identity choices. And then I will discuss the Tawhidi paradigm and compare it to the other secular paradigm before I reach some conclusions. This is the hierarchy. Okay, let's see. Okay, so if we start from the universe, that universe could be either unordered or non-order. Everything around us could either have been existing or established or formed according to some order or a non-order. If there's non-order, we're talking about anarchy. If there's an ordered, that order rather, could have come through a divine will at random. If it comes at random, that would be somebody probably identified as an atheist. That's their primary identity. They don't believe that this universe came through divine will, maybe through some order, but that order came at random, Big Bang or what have you. That person is identified as an atheist. If someone believes in a divine will, that divine will could either be concerned about the creation it caused, that there is a purpose to this, or unconcerned. There is not really a purpose. If there's unconcerned, we call that person, or they call themselves agnostic. They believe there is some kind of a power out there. That power brought this world together. It created that world. It established that order, but there was really no purpose, and it just unconcerned of what happened to this order. If you believe that divine will did have a concern and a purpose, then the next level is that this concern was either revealed or not revealed. It was revealed through primarily messengers, books, some kind of a communication with the purpose or with the people that they were created, or they didn't reveal themselves, even though they are concerned about them, and they left it to human beings to find out how they can care for their happiness, salvation. That type of belief, the Quran refers to as Hanafi. If people had revelations, certainly they came through history, through over time. Either these revelations were preserved or not preserved or not fully preserved. We know from history that there were all kinds of stories, could be myths for some, but stories for others could be authenticized or not. They call themselves prophets, messengers, holy men, and these books are called holy books. But if these holy books or these messages, if they were preserved, then they would have to be proven to have been preserved. And if they have not been preserved, they certainly would not be the exact revelation that that divine will sent to man or to the people living on earth. Muslims, believers, with a lot of evidence, unfortunately, I do not have the time today to go over it, because this is, if we believe that this is a logical diagram hierarchy, it can be proven whether or not that Quran is actually, that Muslims believe was sent from God as one of the revelations, whether it could be proven that the Quran is a product of human beings or product of a divine will. Assuming, this is one of the other assumptions, that it is preserved from the divine will, that brings us to one more level. And that level is that, let's see if it comes through. All right, here we go. All right, that level, whether that revelation guides us to what I would call the Tawheed paradigm or the Tawheedi paradigm, or whether it will be looked at as something nice, something holy, something preserved, but we don't believe that it has a paradigm by which we can live by. So we can either accept some of it, reject some of it, or others. You make yourself a believer in that, but what matters is how you are going to use it in your life. So if you look at this diagram, what I've shown here is that if you go through this on the right-hand side, it will lead to one paradigm or one model. All others will lead to several other models, but all of them centered around the idea of a secular paradigm. This could be in partial form or in a complete form, but the frame of reference is secularization, meaning that some of the things that are attributed in the Tawheedi model to God has been claimed or proclaimed by man. And therefore, some of these things that are supposed to be in the realm of God have been taken away and added to the realm of man, and they have been part of these models. My next presentation or my next discussion is going to revolve around the Tawheedi model. In the Tawheedi model, Tawheed, as you know, is the basic principle of Islam. In Islamic theology, Islam means total submission or total surrender to the will of God. But the will of God can only be known by God. It has to be revealed, it has to be proclaimed or divulged by God. In a nutshell, Tawheed attests or talks about the oneness of God. It talks about his uniqueness, characteristics, his unlikeness, that no one is unto him, is like him. I wouldn't want to discuss this concept as presented in theology schools. When they talk about Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, al-Asma' wa Sifat, and talk about very abstract concepts. You know, what may be referred to as the unity of worship, unity of lordship, the unity of names and attributes. And then divide them into believers and Muslims and what they're supposed to do. That's not my approach. My approach is a bit different. I'd like to talk about Tawheed as an interrelationship between God and his creation. Whether we're talking about living creatures like people or other creations. The paradigm and model of Tawheed has two realms. In this instance, has two realms: the realm of God and the non-God. Again, try to share. Give me a second here. We have all these windows open at the same time, makes it difficult to go through them. I will try. All right, so we have two realms. The realm in the Tawheed paradigm, we're talking about God and non-God. God is the one who has infinite knowledge, infinite ability and power, mightness, limitless capacity for justice, mercy, compassion, bounty, grace, generosity, total dominion, provider, and so on and so forth. The non-God, on the other hand, is created within limitations and weaknesses. That's everything else other than God. So on one hand, we have God, on the other, we have everything else. And you can count every other creatures, whether they are animate, whether they are living or not, outside the realm of God. In addition, he is the creator, while everything else is the created. He is the transcendent. Everything else is non-transcendent. He is the sacred. Everything else is profane. He is the absolute. Everything else is relative. He is the infinite. Everything else is finite. He is the unlimited. Everything else is limited. He has unique attributes, while the others have common characteristics. So in the realm of Tawheed, we have to distinguish between one entity, we called it God, and everything else comes to be non-God. And this way, we're able to differentiate between the two. And because in this system of two realms, man's knowledge is limited and finite, we need assistance in understanding the purpose of life, in realizing the will of that divine will, in knowing the answers to many questions about life, death, sickness, relationships, creation, nature, forces of nature, moral behavior, human nature, mind, body, soul, the solar system, our universe, and so on, and so on, and so on. The existence of one realm that provides infinite assistance and help, giving answers to these existential questions, our purpose of life, the purpose of creation, that it was not in vain, to understand that we are born free. That part of the will of God is to provide human beings the capacity to believe in him, to know him, to obey him, to follow his commandments, or alternatively, to ignore him, to not believe in him, to deny him, and to defy his will. But with that freedom comes responsibility and judgment to the choices and the exercise of that freedom. In the Tawheedi paradigm, because of God's infinite knowledge and power and man's limitations and finiteness, there are two words. There is the word of Shahada, which means of the seen, that where we can see and touch and hear and sense and discover and experience and live. We're talking about the natural, the physical world, things that we can immediately relate to. And there is also the word of al-ghayb, the unseen, where we cannot see, cannot experience, cannot discover. This word we can only know about from God himself. So believers in him would understand many of his aspects and the world of the unseen only from him, and that he provides human beings of this knowledge through communicating to them, as I said earlier, by only two means. People and men like them, what we call prophets and messengers that he sends from time to time, they provide answers to the existential questions, but men are mortal. So eventually, there will have to be other means, such as books, where these books communicate to his will. So when we talk about the two realms, in the unseen, al-ghayb, and the seen or witness, ash-shahada, on the unseen realm, we're talking about knowledge that is unknown, unknowable, and undiscoverable. While on the shahada side, we're talking about knowledge that is known or could be known or discoverable. So in the Tawheedi paradigm, in the Tawheedi doctrine, a believer must believe in both. And in order to understand many of the questions that actually go into the primary identity of a person, they must be able to know where to get that from. From the unseen, to understand many of the knowledge that you need to know to help you live your life in a way that will be a life of a peaceful person who can live their life understanding why they were created, understanding where they would go, the purpose of their life, answering the most basic existential questions. They have to know the source. Where do I get this information from? That is from the revelation. That is from the Quran, which was preserved. On the other hand, the word of the seen, of the witness, of the shahada, we get that from the universe, from the all other creations that God made it available to us. This combination of reading the two words is called al-jam'u bayna al-qira'atayn, or the combination or combining both readings, the reading of al-ghayb in terms of the Quran and the reading of al-shahada in terms of the universe. And this is what is meant by the first verse ever given in the Quran to mankind. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Read in the name of thy Lord who has created. It's the first, as I said, verse that was revealed to mankind. To gain knowledge, to discover the truth, facts, the natural or physical laws, or understand our universe, environment, is to seek knowledge. But because there are two words, the word of the seen, the shahada, and the word of al-ghaib, the unseen, then we cannot define or try to know both unless we are assisted by God. Now, I want to go next into showing the actual model that will harmonize this vision, this understanding. As I said, we have two models. One I call the secular model, or the non-Tawhidi model, because some use secular in a way that they may think that this is disparaged, but it is not, its actual definition. Where secular, you put God aside and you try to find out how you can deal with other issues without involving him. And we have the Tawhidi model. The secular model, I can represent that by a straight line with two indices. These indices are man and universe. In this model, man is trying to subjugate the universe, is trying to control the universe. Of course, the universe is controlled by God's laws and power. Nevertheless, man will try to understand the universe, to conquer the universe, to control the universe, to understand it according to whatever knowledge they can get out of it, to desires, whims, but they are unguided by anything except what man thinks is capable of and what he alone could do, decide, desire, decree, or divine. This could be for the good, could be for the bad. It's an open question. Whoever is more able to get to that level of understanding and controlling will carry the day. God made that law happen, is that those who choose to go through that route and they use whatever knowledge that was made available to them through their understanding of the universe, and their motivation, their objective is to control that universe for good or bad, they are capable of doing that. That's part of the free will that God allowed for people. The other model, which I call the Tawhidi model, we don't have two indices, we have three indices. We have Allah, man, and universe. And in this model, it is no longer an attempt by man to control the universe. Because at the center of this model is man's realization of Allah being the center of his life. In the first model, in the secular model, man is the center. And his capacity and ability to control everything else is what guides him. In the Tawhidi model, God becomes the center of man's life. And the universe just becomes a tool by which the understanding of that universe and the subjugation of that universe is the tool by which man could come closer to Allah. The relationship between man and Allah is based on that realization. For Allah, it's about creation. Just 1 second. For Allah and man, The relationship is one of realization that God is God and man is a non-God, and that man obeys and is guided by God's and that divine will through that paradigm of Tawheed, where God is the center of man's life. The relationship between Allah and the universe is God created both the universe and man and gave them all the laws, the sunan, social, natural, and otherwise, by which they will adhere to these sunan, to these laws. And God made them available to everybody, including that God gave man this unique attribute that no other creation was given, which is free will. But in this model, the relationship between man and universe is subjected to the realization that the universe is only a tool for man to use to make God the center of their lives. And therefore, what I would like to talk about in my next few minutes or slides is to see what principles will guide us to make sure that these would be in harmony. What are the principles that will be followed in terms of the relationship between Allah and man? What are the principles of man and universe? But also, what are the principles that will guide man in his relationship to man? Let me repeat. The relationship between Allah and man should be based on the realization of the Tawheed model, which is Tawheed. The relationship between man and universe should be based on what Ibn Khaldun calls Al-Imran, which is roughly could be also translated as civilization, which means Imran other than destruction. It's the opposite of destruction. It's about building, construction. It's a positive word. But also the relationship between man and his fellow man is based on tazkiyah and cooperation. Is to purify oneself so that they can adhere to the highest levels or the highest values that man can come to exemplify. So, if we look at these principles, again, this is based on, as I said earlier, on the fact that God gave us free will to exercise it. There is no original sin, as some other traditions would have. You're born free. You have the capacity to sin, but there is no original sin. You can commit aggression, but that's a choice. You can go beyond the permissible and cross boundaries, but there are consequences for this. With that free choice, with that free will come responsibility and therefore judgment. So the Quran always talks about believe in Allah and the day of judgment. There is a day of judgment. There is a day of reckoning, because these choices are not just given free. These choices are given to you to exercise them, but how you exercise them will have a consequence. So,
if we could have an idea or time, shall we need further?
oh, how much time?
How much time shall we need further for rest of your presentation, if we could have an idea of that?
I mean, I can have 20 minutes, I can have 15, you know, how much they can give me, I don't know.
Okay, can you bring it slightly lower?
Okay, I'll try my best, then I'll speed up and try to cut down on my examples.
So nice of you, thank you.
All right, so we talked about see, just 1 second. Tawheedi model, we talk about the three indices, Allah, universe, and man. And we talked about that the universe is to be subjugated and man has free will. And we talk about the three relationship. God created both. The relationship between Allah and man is based on 5 principles. The principle of istikhlaf, of takreem, of amana, of ibtila, and of ibadah. Now, I could, of course, explain each one of them. Since I am, I don't have a lot of time, I'll just say a word or two about each one. The istikhlaf is where it could be translated roughly as being those who can represent God's will on earth. Someone who is sometimes referred to as vice-regent. But this is, in many ayat we read that those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to represent that divine will, that's the first thing, which is basically the assignment. This is, Adam was the first. We have that story of creation. I don't have time again to go over many details, but that's the first principle, is that God has wanted to make man in his present format, which is son, which is Adam and his offsprings, to be those who have been given that assignment to become the representative of God's will on earth. Second is takreem, they have been honored. And we again, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, Allah honored, and that honor comes in the form of free will, of the use of the mind. And then we have the amana, which again, al-amana means responsibility in this context. إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ إِلَى نِهَايَةِ الْآيَةِ, to the rest of the ayah. But that means that there is a trust, there is an amana, there is responsibility that has been given because of that takreem, of that free will, of that intellect that God gave man. Then with that would come a responsibility. And then the fourth one is al-ibtila, that this life is not the end in of itself. This life is only a phase of people's living, and therefore life would just become a series of tests to see whether that proclamation, that pledge that a person is actually adhering to God's commandments, to God's instructions, to God's divine will, that would be tested. That was not going to be just simply a proclamation. And these tests would be different from person to person, but eventually it will come to a test in different forms, and whether people pass it or fail it, it's going to depend on the choices they make. But in order to help them to achieve that, there's the fifth principle, which is the principle of ibadah or worship. And in this essence, all kinds of worship is not just the rituals, because this concept of ibadah is encompassing all actions that a person would do. But God also did not leave that person astray. He gave them all kinds of ways by which they can actually learn how to pass the tests, and also how to become closer to him through these rituals. I had a lot to say, but I'm going to skip and just go to the next two principles which define the relationship between man and universe. One is the taskhir, which means the subjugation. God made this universe basically available to man to discover and to bring it under control and to understand it and to use it. Even though man is not the most powerful, you could see all kinds of creations that are much more powerful than man, including certain animals, the fire, the oceans, the wind, and we can go on and on and on and on. Even though all these creatures, all these creations are much stronger than man, yet they have been made to serve man, and man is able actually to control it. And I'm speaking in a collective form. But the seventh principle is tamkeen. And in this instance, we are guided by the purpose that God, and again, this is in one of the surahs, Surah An-Nur, in which God promises those who are believers or they do the good deeds that not only that they will be the representative, but also that they will also serve as tamkeen, or that they will be able to establish a power, establish a dominion by which they can do it. So again, it's a matter of choice for that to happen. This is not about destruction of the universe. It's about Imran. It's about building that universe. And of course, in Surah Al-Hajj also, الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر. There are all kinds of things that come with that. But the last two principles that have to do with the relationship between man and man is what is referred to as tadafu' and shuhud. Tadafu' is the principle which, again, most of these terms I use the Arabic terms because it's very difficult to give them the proper meaning simply by one word, because they mean many words in English. But it means this engagement, which could be through cooperation or conflict between good and bad, between evil and good, by which people are engaged. They can cooperate if they are doing good, or they can actually conflict and confront each other if they are doing bad. But through that tadafu', through that engagement, there will be changes in societies, will be changes also that could be of historic proportions. And God says again in Surah Al-Baqarah, ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض ولكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين. This is the very important principle. If people go through certain sunan, then they would be able to change things. This is how we change things. And the last one is shuhud, because that's the purpose of the believer. At the end of the day, everyone is going to end, everybody is going to depart, and everybody is going, according to this paradigm, they will be resurrected and they will have to face justice. They will have to be accountable for what they have done. And those who have done what they were supposed to do, they will be the witnesses on that day of judgment. It's like a court. These will be witnesses. So they will attest to the fact whether it was that you could have gone through that process, through that journey or not. وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا. So this is again back to the أمة وسطا. So I did have other characteristics about what does it mean to be shuhud. There will be 10 principles or 10 characteristics, which I will skip in order just to conclude. So we can go to the others. What I tried to do in this talk is to talk about what identity is, and I just focused on primary identity as an informed choice. People could have all kinds of pressures when we talk about the youth. You know, they could be taken into a nationalist trend, or they could go into some kind of a tribal or ethnic or race or sexual orientation or what have you. All these kind of different identities are really misplaced, because even though they could be felt as being primary identities, the fact of the matter is the primary identity is what's going to make the most difference in your life, not just in the life that you live here, but in the hereafter. Of course, if someone does not even have that belief, in other words, they could be on the other ones, in the atheist realm or in the agnostic realm or into an unbeliever realm, then we're talking, we're going to have a different kind of discussion, because there it needs to be, to that level of discussion need to be higher. Could it be an unordered system? That's what I started with the model. Or is it an ordered system? Could there be a divine will or not a divine will? Would that divine will actually leave people astray, or will they guide them? And if they guide them, will they guide them for some time and leave them for others, or will they guide them for all times? And if they guide them for all times, what did they leave them with? And in this analysis, you will find that the Quran was basically the book of guidance, the book that God preserved for all mankind to follow. What is left for us to do is to divine whether that Quran we can truly understand it and we can truly carry its message. that would be the primary identity choice. A person could actually go through this whole process and end his decision by saying, I'm not following that, I have a different path, or they can follow it. That obviously is a choice, but as I said, with the choice comes consequences. So we talked about the Tawhidi model, that if you go through that process, and you will find that we're talking about a three indices. It's a triangle. It's not a line of man universe or man, but actually God man universe, which means Tawheed between man and God, Tazkiyah between man, and Imran between man and universe. And in this process, what you're trying to do is to try to get your best qualities, your best values that would define you in terms of your primary identity. And therefore, all other identities should be pushed aside, should be pushed down according to the model. So if someone is nationalist and they value nationalism or tribal affiliations or sexual orientation or what have you over this identity, then either they would be violating their primary identity principles, or they would have to go and find out what actually means for that. We're not denying other secondary or tertiary identities or characteristics or personalities, or what we're doing is we're trying to highlight what should be the primary identity for people. We talked about these principles. We talked about 9 principles, basically. We also said that all these other types of identity are subject to the primary identity. And my final point here is that despite what some may say when it comes to how we can relive Islam in our lives, I would say that the Muslim world has gone through 1300 years from the time of the Prophet in the Medina state, the city, the Medina state after Hijrah, all the time until approximately the beginning of the 20th century. This was almost uninterrupted period, but now we live in an era when that world collapsed, in the early 20th century. A lot of people are trying to see how we can reestablish this harmony between God and man according to the principles of Islam. We are in this transitional period, and whenever you have transitional periods, you're going to face all kinds of challenges, and these challenges eventually would have to be sorted out. And what I would say to our youth is that the Quran is the best guide for us during this period. We have to find out, in the same way that the first generation tried to start universality of Islam. And I did, as I said, I did have 10 characteristics, but I don't have time to go over it today, perhaps in the future. But these 10 characteristics and also our work will inform us how we can restart this journey towards establishing the second universality of Islam, which certainly is going to be, it's going to have common characteristics with the first one, but also unique characteristics because time is not the same. Thank you very much. Let me stop here. And I know that we are going